Good afternoon. In the absence of Treasurer Wagner, I need a board member to serve as Treasurer Pro Tem. Is there nomination and a second at the table?
As our normal, I'll nominate myself in hopes that there is a second.
Second.
Thank you both. I appreciate it, especially Mr. Craig. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Craig is elected. Congratulations once again, and we appreciate it. Call to order. Good afternoon. Seeing a quorum of voting members, I call the March 12th Student Achievement and District Instructional Performance Committee of the whole meeting to order. Treasurer Pro Tem Craig, or with the Assistant Treasurer at your left, please take attendance. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Craig,
Here.
Mr. Crossett, Mr. Lindy,
Here.
Ms. Mapp,
Here.
Mrs. Weinberg, Vice President Bolton,
President,
President Moffitt.
thank you. Let's see, sitting in today, we have our Deputy Superintendent. Deputy Superintendent, would you please introduce the following presentations? And thank you for being here.
Yes, I will. Thank you. First, we have John Chambers with his Interim Assistant Superintendent of District Performance, Redesign, Sustainability, and Growth. He will be doing goals and guardrails 1, 2, and 3 today.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I will today be presenting on goals 1, 2, and 3. Next slide, please. Goal 1, just as a refresher, addresses the percent of third graders proficient in reading on the Ohio State test, and we will say it will increase from 47.5% in June 23 to 61% by June of 27. And as you can see from the slide, we met that goal in the fall, and we have grown upon that in the winter testing from 38.6% to 45.2%. So that goal was met. Goal 1B, it addresses the percent of first grade Black students meeting the success criteria on iReady and reading, and their scores will increase from 18.9% in fall of 22 to 26% in fall of 24. And with that goal, we met that target in the fall with 28.9%, and we increased that score in the winter testing to 37%, which was the 8.1% increase in the third grade. And goal 1C addresses the percent of first grade Hispanic students meeting the success criteria on the benchmark on iReady reading, and we said it will increase from 14.3% in the fall of 22 to 21% in the fall of 24. As you can see, we did not meet that target. We had 16% in the winter testing period, but that was a 1.3% increase over the fall. So we have identified that as an area that we are going to address and put additional resources and interventions into. So for some of our key takeaways from goal 1, just at a high level, we need to revisit access to high quality tier 1 instruction in the primary grades. And we need to strengthen our systematic approach to high quality interventions and enrichment. In our next steps, based on the fall third grade ELA and OST data, schools began to skills-based interventions with a focus on assessment and reteaching. And we're kicking off the master scheduling season, which is upon us, looking at guidelines to ensure that students have access to all core subjects and intervention and enrichment. And we're going to revisit explicit instruction strategies within Tier 1, especially in vocabulary and writing.
Assistant Superintendent and Deputy, would it be okay if the board members have particular questions as we go to each goal, or do you want to do them all in
It's,
one?
We can do each goal.
Yeah. Do board members have any questions or comments as you review Goal 1? Member Craig?
Thank you again for this presentation, and I think it's showing some successes that we're seeing. I think one of the questions so one of the thoughts that I have, and then one of the questions I have. One of the thoughts that I have is that we're seeing this growth up closer to 50% for almost each one of the groups, with, again, the exception of certain groups that we know will be a general struggle to get them to 50%. But I think it's a good sign that we're moving closer and closer towards that point as a district. But the one area is the Hispanic number, and I'm curious to see whether or not that has anything to do with also when Hispanic students are entering the district. I think we've talked about in the past about some of the different challenges, but I also think the reality is that if a student enters in the second or third grade who has very limited English proficiency or may not have had consistent educational resources, that they may not necessarily have the tools to get to that number in that third grade level. So I was just curious as to, are there any things that you can point to that might be also reflected in that number?
that is one of the key indicators that we're looking at, is when the students enter CPS. And that data hasn't been totally compiled, but we're definitely aware of that being a barrier with the Hispanic students. It's all in, if they've been here since kindergarten, it will have definitely have a change in their performance. But we're looking at the the Hispanic students. We had a target with them in the first quarter, so we're still compiling the data, and we'll be able to give you something later on in the spring.
Thank you.
I think what you said is true when they come into the school. We're also looking at the resources that we're providing for them and the alignment of what they get from the MLL coordinators, the ones that tutor them, besides what they get from the reading specialists. So aligning all those things, I think we'll begin to see more and more improvement, but you're absolutely right. Some come in and have been to school, some come in and speak absolutely no English at all. And so it's just they're at different places. So making sure we align all of their resources to kind of move them as quickly as we can.
Other questions or comments on Goal 1? Mr. Lindy?
Thanks, and thanks so much for the presentation. I was hoping you could say on the, both, I think, for where we met the target and for where we're behind, just a little bit more about what you all think the causes are of, what allowed those students to reach the target, what got in the way of the other students reaching the target. And then my other question was, on the takeaways, I just wanted to hear more about, I think, first of all, I think the idea that you want to strengthen Tier 1 instruction seems incredibly reasonable and makes great sense. I just want to understand more about how we do that as a school district across all the different schools, across all the different classrooms. And so if anything you could share would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Lindy, Assistant Soup or Deb?
So if, Board Member Lindy, the way we're doing it right now is as we go in and we do our instructional rounds, or the assistant soups in buildings, we are checking to see the use of the Tier 1 curriculum. When we don't see the use of it the way we should, we discuss with the principal, is there a training issue? Does the teacher need training? Are there things that they need? Should we send support? So we're sending supports out. The coaches from curriculum and instruction will go out. They'll do planning days with those teachers where we get subs, sit down, map out the planning, look at what's in the curriculum. If it's a training, some schools have brought Wit and Wisdom in and iReady in, and they've done training during the day with those teachers. They also do what we call a cafe, where the coaches sit in the building in one section, and the teachers can come down on their planning time and see what they need about Tier 1. So systemically, we're trying to make sure that everybody gets what they need when we get into a building and see that the curriculum is not being used the way we think it should be used.
Sorry, that sounds great. I think a couple of follow-up questions. There was a time when I remember you gave a great presentation, you and your team, on the instructional rounds and about where I just thought of this when you mentioned this, where it was being implemented completely, where it was not being implemented yet, where it was sort of in the middle of being implemented. Do you all still keep those records?
Yes, we do.
Could I don't need this today, but I would love a copy just to kind of see where that is.
Absolutely.
And so I would just ask as an information request, not urgent. And then on the things like the cafes and the PD and the trainings and all of that, are those things that you all, trying to not ask this as like a gotcha question. I'm trying to, are those A, things that are new things you all are starting? Or B, were they things that we've been doing all along? If B, it seems like although they are great, they also are working in some places and not working in others, if these are the data that we're seeing. And so what kinds of adjustments, if any, are you making? Does that?
Yes,
a lot.
so I would say to you, we've done instructional rounds and reviews last year. I think we intensified the number of instructional rounds that we've done. I think that, I know for sure that they're working in some places and not others, because there's more work that needs to be done depending on if there's a number of long-term subs in that building. Each building looks different. So the one thing that we have done differently is that we've tiered the schools, right? We looked at the data and we look at what schools need additional support. So when you get the document from us, you'll see the support that's been provided to those schools, how many times the coaches have been in there, what feedback the coaches are giving to us that we may give and work with the principal. So I think we have been doing them. I think you're right, they're working well in some places, and some places it's taken us a little longer because it just depends on the staffing. How many long-term subs, how many, it's just a lot of things that play part in that, but I believe that we are trending in the right direction in most of those places.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments regarding Goal 1? Member Mapp.
Yeah, so thank you for the presentation. I agree with my fellow colleagues about just areas in which there's growth as well as areas of concern. While I'm happy to see that there is growth, I am also very concerned in terms of like the vast differences as it pertains to the data for our Hispanic students and our Black students in comparison to our white students. And this is a very stark contrast when we see that the data for our white students for our winter scores are 80.3%, whereas our Black students are at 37%, and our Hispanic students are at 16%. And so I'm just curious to know several questions. When we are thinking about our Tier 1 instructions and we're thinking about interventions, have we, one, looked at how the Imagination Library as well as Preschool Promise, in addition to, there's another targeted intervention I'm thinking of, but how those interventions are helping to support our students overall? Do we look and pull specific data from those interventions, or are we just implementing those interventions?
When you say Preschool Promise, you mean where the kids are, whether they're coming to us
Prepared and ready, yeah.
ready for kindergarten? I believe the schools look at that data, but from this point of the data, Board Member Mapp, my take on it is when we look at the first graders and where you see a lot of growth and not enough growth, we systemically need to look at how we're progress monitoring our kids, how we're using our Haggerty, how we're using our phonics. And so those are things that when we go into buildings that we're looking at. I would say to you, systemically, we're looking at next year, like how do we schedule that out? What does that look like? What does it look like when we teach phonics, and how are we progress monitoring those kids whose scores continue to be lower? So they need progress monitoring more frequently than a child that only missed 1 or 2 words. So I know the school looks at that data to see what kids are ready when they come from preschool to the kindergarten. We just start with where they are in kindergarten when they take that iReady test, when they take the cadence test, so that we can know from this point on what we need to do in order to move that. Now, in some schools, we do have the Rosie Reader, where they get to take the books home and they get to read the books every night. And Emily and the team met with them today to see if we can spread it even more across the district, because we know that when kids read or read to at a younger age, it increases that fluency in their vocabulary.
Okay, and so, and I think, thank you for that, and I think what you're speaking to in terms of like the Haggerty, does that align with the science of reading? I know
Yes,
that we've been trying
yes,
to
all
have
those
that put-
pieces, yes, absolutely.
Okay, and so
Yes.
with that progress monitoring, are we having those close conversations across the district, from the teachers to the principals to the administration, to ensure that there's continual growth there?
Yes.
Okay.
We're having those conversations. And also just looking at sometimes some of the data, as you all know, those barriers come into play, attendance, behavior, those things that we have to work around with our young people. But our goal is to make sure that we systemically look at the work and making sure that every school is looking at how our young people are learning and how we're progress monitoring that. That's a big piece of this work when you're at that K-1, 2 area.
Yeah. So my other question is, as it pertains to the student demographic, has there been conversation as to why there is a big contrast in terms of our early, our students in their early informative years, why there's that vast difference there, and how we are addressing those barriers that's in place?
I think at each school, we look at where the young people are and the barriers that we have, and then we try to close those gaps as much as we can by ensuring that we double up sometimes, right? If I have the reading specialist working with those kids, the teachers are doing the small groups with those kids. I would say to you, if you look at some of the research, is dependent on the vocabulary that the kids are having at home. So how are they speaking at home? What's the language, and how often are they speaking? Or are they spending a lot of time on these things right here, which is hindering some of our young people from speaking all of the time? So there's a lot of research that goes with that, but I think when they get to school, our goal is to look at where they are and look at how we take them to that next space. And sometimes it's just taking us a little longer depending on what has happened prior to them getting to school, if they've even had that preschool experience or not. So we're looking at it as we look at every child as they sit into the data meeting and talk about what these young people need.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I have a couple of questions. So sorry if I missed something and someone may have already asked the question. I did get an opportunity to read the slides. Board Member Mapp brought up progress monitoring. And I know for me, from just past experience of being in the classroom, I think a concern for me, or what I would like further information on, is how are we giving out this information, whether it's to the students and to the families. So for example, with our at-risk children who are either falling below the particular points, how are we discussing their progress monitoring to ensure that they are moving up that level instead of staying stagnant, in which they're not moving, and then bringing those parents in, because I do know we absolutely need parental involvement to help with, reading and getting these scores up. And so how are the parents being involved besides parent-teacher conferences throughout that whole progress monitoring period of 6 weeks, 9 weeks, whatever it may be?
So I would say to you that all schools are different in how they communicate with their families. Besides the parent conference, they should be getting phone calls home. I know that if a student is not on track, they get what we call the RIMP, and the RIMP tells them, the Reading Improvement Plan tells them where their kids are struggling, if it's nonsense words, if it's short vowels, wherever they fall in that. And then that determines the level of work that we do with the reading specialist and the classroom teacher. But getting the parents in, as you know, is one of our struggles. I know schools will send out a robocall. I know parents that will do now get on a Google Meet, but the communication is there and it's sent home, because by law, we have to send it home, telling them where their young people are.
Right, absolutely, and thank you for that. And I do know that you all try to really go above and beyond, including the parents, whether it's sending that information home, and we're just asking, and we need our parents to really, get on board and really help in solving this problem. So thank you so much for that.
Welcome.
Does anybody else have any additional questions or comments based upon what we've just heard? Let me, if I can do just a couple things. Again, a difference in the, and we've done some good work in gap closing. I think our report card kind of shows that we're doing some good work there. But to that point, the differences that we see within our particular cohorts, I sometimes worry about the cultural bias in the assessments. But we can't hold on to that as an excuse, but still, I think it helps explain some of it. But I'm pleased to hear you use the word vocabulary, because having come from a suburban district that prided itself about these particular test scores or whatever, it's all about vocabulary. What do we do to help our young people, regardless of which cohort they are in, to expand their vocabulary? Because when you talk about ACTs or you talk about SATs, it's all about vocabulary. And that's something I don't know what we can do about, and I'd like to know what we are doing about it.
Well, in our curriculum, the big push for Vice President Bolton is around academic vocabulary and getting the kids to use the language that's within whatever content they're teaching. We also have what we call word walls, and so every classroom has a word wall so that the kids can continue to see that vocabulary on a regular basis. And part of a lot of our reading is all around vocabulary, and we do something called the Frayer model, where kids are learning vocabulary, where they break down the word that exposes them to words that are higher than where they are, so that they can expand their vocabulary. We do some things with Latin roots. So we do quite a few things. In the lower grades, we have what is called a sound wall in many of the classrooms. So we try to do as much as possible to develop their vocabulary while they're at school, making sure they use the appropriate English at school, sharing with them what those words are and how that happens. So those are the things that we do pretty much.
Thank you. And one last thing for me. That you've mentioned a couple of times about long-term subs. We're fortunate to have a great many good long-term subs.
Oh, yes, we do.
I always worry, though, about where the long-term subs are, in what buildings are they, and in what buildings are they not. And I think that that's something from an equity standpoint we have to look at. And again, we're thankful for the ones that we have, but it is something where the community does wonder and would like to see sort of a comparison. The more we do, as President Moffitt's emphasized, per student and per school equity measures, I do worry about the long-term sub-assignments.
And we can bring that data back, but a lot of times they're at those hard-to-fill areas. And you're right, we do have some amazing long-term subs. So when I say that, I mean from the frame that we need to make sure they're trained in the curriculum. So it may take us a little longer because we got to make sure they have the content and make so that they can deliver the instruction the way we need them to. But we do have some amazing long-term subs, and we can get that data, but we have quite a few of them across the district and in some of our math and ELA classrooms. So any support that we give them to help them do what needs to be done for our young people is what I was referring to when we do those instructional rounds and using of the Tier 1 curriculum.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Goal 2, is that where we are?
Yes. Goal 2, as a refresher, the current gap in reading proficiency between 6th grade African-American, Hispanic, and multiracial students and 6th grade white students on the OST will shrink from 47.4% in June of '23 to 27% by June of '27. And looking at this particular data, Goal 2A, we're focusing on the percent of SY '23 4th grade multiracial students meeting success on the benchmark in iReady reading. And the goal is to increase from 46% in fall of '22 to 58% by fall of '24. And as you can see, in the fall of '24, we did not meet that target. We were off by a little over 3.9%, but we did meet that target in the winter data. The winter data, we were at 59.1. So although we did not meet it in the fall, the students did meet that target in the winter. And goal 2B looks at the percent of SY '23 fourth grade Black students meeting the success criteria on iReady Reading. And we said it will increase from 25% in the fall of '22 to 35% in the fall of '24. With this particular target, again, we did not meet the target in the fall of 35%, but we did meet that target in the winter testing period. We met that target by reaching 35.4% proficient on that benchmark, which was a 6.4% increase over the fall. And goal 2C looks at the percent of school year '23 fourth grade Hispanic students on the iReady reading, and we said we will increase from 18.3% in the fall of '22 to 29% in the fall of '24. Again, this target was not met, and we didn't reach that 29% mark in the winter as well, but we did have a 2.8% increase from fall to winter. And some of our key takeaways, as I mentioned, goals 2A and B were not met in the fall, but we did meet those targets in the winter. And the data continues to underscore the need to strengthen Tier 1 instruction. And we said as well as systemic interventions and enrichment based on the students' needs. In our next steps, we're looking at, based on the winter data, we use a toolkit of high-quality tasks and lessons to strengthen skills-based interventions, create intentional testing environments, and focus on high expectations, and analyze the spring OST achievement data to determine what supports our students will need.
Any questions on goal 2? Member Craig.
Just wanted to, again, maybe reiterate something we talked about with the first goal, which is that I do think there's a challenge in where some of our Hispanic students enter the educational process, and especially when it comes to some of our English proficiency numbers. But I did want to maybe ask a little bit of a question that's probably a little bit more leading into it, but I think one of the struggles that we've also seen is that when we get to high school, where you are in 6th, 7th, 8th, puts you at a, if you're achieving and you're at proficiency, it gives you so much more of an advantage to be able to do more within that high school realm, whether that's taking CCP courses, as whether that's taking AP courses, that actually puts you ahead of schedule, right? And I think one of my concerns, or I guess maybe one of the questions I would have is just, is there any concern with, as we're thinking about middle school models and some of the other things that we've made changes to, how much effort or how much attention needs to be paid more maybe in some ways to that 6th, 7th, 8th grade reading proficiency? In a lot of ways, because there's not the same time at 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th to catch someone up. And so, maybe if you can speak a little bit to just what the focus might be in paying attention to that, and also what are the efforts that might be being worked through as we think about some of these newer models where we're not going to have the same folks within one building anymore.
Yeah, we've been really intentional, especially in the ELA area, as we're starting to look at the instructional philosophies of the different middle schools. And so as we're choosing the curriculum, it's working with the curriculum department in making sure that the ELA and math programs that we have in those buildings meet the needs of the kids in the building, right? It's not, this is just going to be a generic thing that we're throwing out for all of the schools. We're being really intentional about the school's needs based on the students that are coming from the elementaries and some of the kids in some cases that will be coming from the high schools down to the middle schools. Just looking at that data and being really intentional about what programs that we use in those schools, especially with our some of our ELL school students. We want to make sure that those students have those interventions and things that they need as they're coming into our schools, into those middle schools.
Thank you.
Yes, so I'll be quick with my question. I just wanted to see if you could elaborate a little bit more on, for next steps, For next steps, you have creating an intentional testing environment. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? Because I would hope that we would have great intentional testing environments for every student. So if you could elaborate more on what other best practices are you referring to, or if you could elaborate a little bit more onto that.
So when we say creating those intentional testing environments, we're talking about looking at every child and what they need. So instead of, sometimes we may just test all the kids together, but I'm easily distracted, right? So I may need to be in a small group so that they can put me in a small group so that I can focus. So if I'm an inclusion student and I've been pulled out, board member Weinberg, into math class all year, then I should probably test with that math class with that teacher. So really looking at what the young people need and making a testing environment that's not necessarily convenient and easy. It may take us a little longer, but it's gonna be about the kids. So when the principals come down this week, tomorrow actually, we're gonna be talking about their testing environment. What does that look like? What does it sound like and feel like so that you get the best out of every student? So that's what that's referring to.
Thank you for saying that. And yes, it's always not about what is the easiest,
Yeah.
but it's for what our students need. And thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Thank you. I just had a question and a comment. I certainly understand why the interim goal targets are set the way that they're set by focusing on these subgroups and no pushback. And it's certainly, I think, administration's decision. I wanted to go back to the overall goal, which is about gap reduction. And so, you could imagine that the subgroups are getting better, or they could even be getting worse, and the gap might be doing any number of things. Like, do you have any read on, I guess I could just read it off of here because you have all the subgroups on here, but my mental math is not that good. Is the gap getting better, or is the gap getting worse? I think is the question I'm trying to ask.
It's a slight improvement, but it's not like overall worse. I mean, it varies between the three subgroups. If you look at the gap between the, if we're looking at the multiracial students as a group, it's, we have closed that gap from, whereas the white students were at 68%, and the multiracial students were at 46% in the fall of '22. We have 77% for white students and 59% for the multiracial students. So that gap has closed slightly, but I haven't done the data for every single group at this
And
point.
that's okay, like, and I really don't want to, I just said I couldn't do that on my feet. I don't want to be asking you to do
tried.
that
I
on your
tried.
feet. That's not what I'm asking. I think just from a, what, all of these numbers wind up on paper because they stand for things that we care about. And so I was trying to pull up a level of altitude and ask from the big things that we care about, which is that no matter what your race background, economic background, what zip code you grow up in, we want you to have access to excellent educational opportunity. I was just curious, what's your take on, is this getting better or worse? And I think what I hear you saying is that it's getting better slightly. We'd like it to get better more.
Yes,
Is
we
that
would.
right?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. And then I think just the comment was going to be, we had this conversation in our last board meeting about how do we move forward around a budget, given some of these financial gaps that we need to close. And I think the treasurer was asking, what are the sacred cows, I think was the phrase I remember, like what are the things that we need to know that we can't cut? Or what is it that's really a priority to the board? I think these are the priority for the board. And so whatever budget comes through, whatever the proposal is from the administration, the thing that I think makes sense is we're recommending this to you board members because we think that this will do the most for the goals that the board has adopted than any other option we can come up with. Here are the other options we considered and why we think this is less good than the one that we're proposing. And so I'm glad we're doing this. I appreciate the information, and I hope that's where we can go on budget. Thanks.
Other questions, comments? I would just like to second the issue regarding intentional testing. I mean, obviously, there are rules and regulations that the state imposes on us.
absolutely.
So that we have to live by those. But yes, usually a high-achieving district is dedicating not just a significant amount of time through the year, because we dedicate a tremendous amount of time in preparation for these tests during the whole year. But when you're in a district, and let's say in some of the suburbs, that intentional testing piece is of a tremendous priority. Everybody knows when it is and how it's to be done, and nobody needs to get in the way of that being successful. So it is almost a psychological as well as as you say, a physical
Yeah.
effort that we can make. I think that's very important. Glad to hear that. Turn it over to you, Nick. Goal 3. You good? Okay. If we're done with goal 2, you have another 2? Go for it.
Yes, so again, thank you for the information. Just looking at the data, I do know that you highlighted we did not meet the goal in the fall, but we met it in the winter. Can you speak a little to what were some of those factors that prevented us from meeting the target goal by the fall? And I do recognize that we're talking about some takeaways are increasing and improving the Tier 1 instructional delivery, but are there other factors that contributed to us not meeting that benchmark goal in the fall?
I'm not going to sit here and say I know exactly what contributed to us not meeting that fall target, but I will say, looking at the data from the fall benchmark allowed us to, have more targeted interventions for the students, and it was a really renewed effort, by Dr. Smith and the members of the curriculum department to look at the individual students' data versus grade level data, and target what that individual student needed based on their performance in the fall. So I think those, like I said, I can't speak to how their fall scores came about, but I can say how the interventions and things that we've put in place by having a renewed focus on the individual student data improved those scores from fall to winter.
Okay,
And then, Board Member Mapp, when we come in for the fall, remember, that pretty much is our baseline. So sometimes they come in and they have been reading all summer and it shows up. And sometimes they have had a good time in the summer and we need to bring them in from the summer slide. So I think that was where they were, which to me is exciting that we did show some increase by some of the things that we did. So it just always depends on where our young people are, because we take the tests when we get back August. By the first week of September, we finish assessing those kids.
thank you. I appreciate the focus on the specific student data, because my other thoughts around that was how we are, I know that there was previous discussion about the data walks and the data conversations with the students and how we are using that information to ensure that there's growth. Do we take the student feedback when we're having those data conversations with the students to help drive the instruction, to help drive the interventions as well?
I would say that when the teachers meet with the kids, they have those conversations. So because they're setting their next goal, they look at what they did well, they talk about what they need to work on to get to the next place. So I'm sure in a lot of the schools, the kids are talking back to the teachers about what they're struggling with or what they need support, and so that we can move forward with those interventions. And they set those goals based on where they are. And then our kids that are using iReady, it's individualized to what they need. So
Yeah,
I
because
think so. I believe so.
I have the sentiments of Board Member Weinberg. When we're thinking about moving data, it is from a systemic approach. And so I recognize that we have our interventions, but I also think that it's very important and essential for our students to be a part of that conversation so that they know what their expectations are and they know what goals they are trying to strive towards and accomplish. And so I know that we're doing that. I just wanted to know if there is ways that we can improve that or include that, from a systematic lens.
And I think we can, and we try to give each school some autonomy around it. So if you look at the data cards or the data sheet, each school looks different because the teachers collaborate and make that sheet. This is what we want in it. This is what we're adding. It looks different from K to 2, from 3 to 6, or 9 to 12. But I think there's always opportunities for us to think about how do we make sure that there's voice from the kids in their data.
Thank you.
President Moffett?
So I apologize for being a little late. I was coming back from the governor's address, so thank you, Vice President Bolton, for stepping in. I appreciate that our young people are at the conversation level, understanding their data, but I'm going to continue to ask administration, what are we doing to bring the parents in for these conversations? And I may have missed it. I may have missed it. So can you reiterate that? Again, I apologize for being late.
You wanted to, oh, okay.
Somebody. Okay.
We did talk about it a little bit. We talked about how each school tries to do different things. Of course, parent conference is always something. We send things home with the kids, phone calls, meetings with parents. So we try to do everything we can to bring them in. Some principals, I didn't even mention this last time, they're out at the car rider line. Like, hey, can you come and talk to me about your child's data? I think we do as many things as we can to bring them in so that they have conversations around where their young people are and how we can work together to make sure they have a good educational experience.
Is there any continuity between the schools that do whatever they deem successful job at engaging the parents around the data and the schools that don't? And I don't mean to make that part competitive, but I'm wondering, is there any data to suggest that that parent piece makes a significant difference and the data talking with the kids? I'm just trying to understand. Some schools do this really, really well, and some schools, are at a 3-star, but maybe they don't do it. So are we looking at some of the causal effects of the increase of the data in order to improve the outcomes?
Yes, so
Does that
I
make
would
sense?
say, yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. I would say you can find research on both sides of that, right? I would say you can find some schools that are doing extremely well academically and have low parent involvement. And then I would say you can find some schools that have a lot of parent involvement and have great scores, because we need the parents there. But the reality of what moves students and impacts student achievement is being in front of an amazing teacher, adjusting instruction as needed, interventions or enrichments, providing kids with feedback, having kids talk about their data, and creating a space in the school where kids love to be. That's what impacts student achievement. Yes, we need the parents. Yes, we want them, but I think there's some research that will show you that either side of the coin, we probably can find schools on both sides that are excelling, that have very little parent involvement, and some that have a lot that are excelling. So I think it comes down to what's happening in that classroom.
I appreciate that, and I was just kind of asking to explore how can we, if we see the student outcomes improving, how can we replicate that across our district? So that's what I was thinking, are we collecting that data to be able to say, hey, this school, this 3rd grade reading level closed the gap this much, they did these things, oh, let's try that as a blueprint.
Yeah. It's always better when parents are involved, and parents are working a lot now, so trying to get some of our parents in, just thinking of ways outside the box. I know some people have done early morning because parents work in the evening. I mean, everything I think that you could possibly do, some of the principals have thought about it, but honestly, at the end of the day, those babies show up every day, and that instruction is where it's supposed to be, that tier 1, that tier 2, celebrating the kids, making sure they know their data, having a space where I come in and people are smiling and happy to see me. It makes a difference in the work that we do.
Thank you.
We're ready to go on then to goal 3.
Okay, goal 3, the percentage of first-time Algebra 1 test takers proficient on the end of the course exam will increase from 30% in June of '23 to 50% by June of '27. And looking at goal 3A, we look at the percentage of school year '23 6th graders meeting the success criteria on the benchmark on iReady Math will increase from 23.5% in the fall to 35% in the fall of '24. And when looking at this data, I need to preface by saying this, we're looking at this group as a cohort, and we're looking at from where they came from in the 6th grade to where they are in the, currently in 8th grade. And as the students matriculate up through the grade level, when they leave 6th grade and they go to 7th grade, a lot of our students that are accelerated, those students are no longer part of that particular cohort, those students in math, because those students will at times go straight to Algebra 1, and in the 8th grade, they'll go to geometry. So while their cohort is in Math 8, we may have 150 to 250 kids that are in accelerated courses in Algebra 1 or geometry. So as we look at this data, it looks like it's a significant drop. As the years, if you look as the the years go from from 6th grade through their 8th grade, the scores drop because the amount of kids in that cohort is shrinking because the kids are taking in math. A lot of the kids that are accelerated are taking high school courses. So I just wanted to preface that. But with this particular target, we didn't meet it. It was 16.8% of all students, and the target was 35%. In goal 3B, this goal is a percent of school year 23 7th grade students meeting success criteria on the benchmark in the MAP testing in math will increase from 25.2% in the fall of 22 to 30% in the fall of 24. We met this target. If you look at the fall 24-25 Algebra 1 score, we were at 33%, and so we eclipsed that target of 30%, and we also built upon that in the winter, going up another 3.6% with that particular group. Now, I'm not sure because this slide was updated, so I want to make sure we're all looking at the same thing, okay? Because even mine is a little different, so I got to look at the screen. This particular goal was looking at the percent of school year 23 7th grade Black male students meeting the success criteria on the benchmark on the MAP test in math, and we said it will increase from 13.3% in the fall of 22 to 20% in the fall of 24. And looking at the data, we have met that goal. We had 24% of our Black students meet that particular goal in the winter, and we had 20.5% of those students that met the goal in the fall. And our key takeaways, we still need to continue to strengthen the instructional delivery in Algebra 1, but we also need to look at grade 7 and 8 also. And just taking in consideration how that cohort gets dispersed once they get to high school. And as the students take more accelerated courses, which is great, giving them the stretch, it's also weakening the cohort as the students matriculate up through the grade levels. And we also just said that the data continues to underscore the need for both grade level and instructional interventions. I mean, we have to continue to provide the interventions for our students when we see deficits. In our next steps, we're going to begin 7th and 8th grade professional learning collaboratives like we have with our Algebra 1 math collaborative. We're again with the master scheduling, and we're looking at the master schedule as we move forward going into the fall, making sure that schools are intentional about where they're placing particular courses, where particular grade levels may take particular courses. is it better to have primary early, or ELA and math courses earlier in the day versus the back end of the day? So it's more about being intentional on what the students need versus what the adults in the building, would prefer. So we're being really more intentional about focusing on the master schedule. And we're looking to implement instructional calendars and more on a broader level. Some schools utilize them and they're done very well. But we want to look at that as a systemic practice of having, instructional calendars used across the district in the classrooms. And we looked at, creating inclusive spaces for activities that are aligned to our students' need, not just having, some activities in the classroom that are, more generic, but having, the activities that are aligned to what the students in that classroom need. And that, I'm happy to say, is it.
Any questions or comments for goal 3? Mr. Craig?
I'll be really quick. So it's just 2 quick thoughts. One is I appreciate you explaining, again, for the math nerd in me, the numerator is changing while the denominator is staying the same.
Yes.
So we have fewer students in the numerator while the denominator of who makes up the cohort stays the same. That means you're invariably going to have a lower percentage in some ways. So I appreciate you giving that clarification. I think the other quick thought is, and I think this goes a little bit to, again, probably a little bit more focused on this than at times than usual, but the programmatic side to what we do for math, to me, is so crucial when we talk about 7th and 8th grade. And it's for the exact reason you gave, which is some students are moving up into algebra at 7th and 8th grade level, and some students are not. And when they then come to high school, and how do we get them through their math in high school? How do we get them through programmatic stuff in high school if they're coming in at different starting points, right? And so if you're not going to be if you're not offered algebra at a school, that's a problematic thing for some students who are looking to do other things or looking to get into other areas. But if we're also offered algebra and you're not successful and you move forward, how are we touching back? So I think that's, for me, that'd be a good thing for us to talk about at some point with regards to looking at the different variations of how 7th and 8th grade will be provided, is how we addressing students who either do not receive the opportunity or do not necessarily succeed at that opportunity in the 7th and 8th grade level, who then move on to high school, who may be teaching it in maybe teaching a different idea or a different cohort of folks in that same subject matter. So I think that's, because again, it's a necessary thing for you to complete to get your high school diploma, so.
Other comments or questions? Mr. Lindy?
Yes, thank you. Again, really appreciate the presentation. I think I had some questions about just trying to make sure I was following the numbers the right way. Could we go back to slide 13 for just a second? Okay, and I wanted to make sure that I was following the point about the transition. Was it between 6th and 7th grade, 7th and 8th grade, 8th to, what was the year that you were focused on?
Well, the transition is when the kids leave from 6th grade to 7th grade. That's when the cohort starts to break up, because as the kids go into 7th grade, that's when the kids that are accelerated had an opportunity to take the accelerated math courses.
So it would be like in the 6th grade column, everybody's in the same math class.
Pretty
In the
much.
7th grade column, some kids are in the accelerated math class, some kids are in the not accelerated math class.
Correct.
And is that then the same in 8th grade? Some would
Yes.
continue on in accelerated and some would not?
Right, you would have students that in 7th grade that may be in Algebra 1 instead of Math 7. And then the next year, instead of being in Math 8, they will be in Geometry. So, so they're constantly, moving ahead of that cohort. And, each year, as the kids from it may be even more kids that we find out that need that acceleration. And instead of being from going into Math 8, they'll go into Algebra 1. So it just, that cohort just constantly gets broken up.
All this feels healthy and good and normal, and to create different opportunities for kids who are on different, and even different interests. All that sounds great. I'm trying to understand how that explains a decline in the scores. That's the part I wasn't totally sure I followed.
Well, if we would have all of the kids that were that would go to the 7th grade, that would be in Algebra 1, and some of the kids will be in Algebra 1. If we put those kids back into the mix with their 7th grade, cohort, and they're all taking Math 7, that those scores would be a lot higher because you would have, it could be in a given year, 200, 250 kids taken out of that, that cohort being put into an accelerated math course.
So I think what I'm trying to make sure I'm asking is, so in the 6th grade column, where it says 23.5% there at the top, everybody's taking the math class. Then in the 7th grade column, we start to see some kids go to advanced and some kids stay in 7. So that would be the first year where the kids' scores are not counted in the, basically you're taking out the highest skilled kids. So you'd expect the number to go down in the 7th grade column, but it goes down in the 8th grade column. And so that's why I was getting confused.
Well, I can't explain I can look at the dip in 8th grade and I can tell that's where the kids are being moved. They were moved from that 7th grade year, and then the kids were taken out, were moved up into accelerated courses that following year. I really can't explain the 30% in the fall of 24 with 7th grade. And I see
Yeah.
exactly what you're talking about. You would think it would, kind of grow upon that because that's where that was that initial year of high school math.
I think I have two concerns about this. One is when the dip happens doesn't seem to make sense to me, which is what we were just talking about. Then the second, like new paragraph, I'm also trying to get my head wrapped around the size. Like you said, 200 students may go to accelerated math. How many kids are there in 7th grade?
That I can find out.
Ballpark, like even if we have 36,000 kids divided by 12, that's like about 3,000 per year. And if you take 200 out of 3,000 kids, I don't think that can make the score drop in half. So even just based on the magnitude of it, like even if this change were happening in 8th grade, and I think it's happening a year earlier, it feels like it's much too big a drop to be explained by missing 200 kids' test scores out of 3,000, unless I'm missing something.
Dr. Smith?
Oh, it's 2,280.
Great, so it's 10% of the kids, you take out 10% of the kids' scores and the score drops in half. So, and I think the reason I'm pushing on this is I don't need an answer today. This stuff is hard. If it were easy, everybody would have figured it out. But if it just were, my hypothesis is we don't really understand yet why the score has gone down. And I think if we're going to do something to get the kids to learn more math, we first have to understand why it's going down. There may be a really important answer here that I am missing. I make mistakes all the time. If there is, please tell me. But if not, I think my request would be, could we get a follow-up about what is the cause of the decline, and what's the plan for it?
President Moffitt?
So thank you. I am very similar to Board Member Lindy's point, but I think that before looking at it that way, I think that I'd like to see a longitudinal, I'd like to see the data over time, because what I go to is that probably that year 2023, 2024 is an anomaly and that data's wrong. That's what I go to. I want to verify that data is correct, because it doesn't look to me, I don't want to see the dip and understand the dip yet until I verify that the data that it's being provided is actually accurate. And I am not exactly sure that data is accurate. So what I'm going to ask the administration to do is to look longitudinally from that data. We've been given presentations over some time, so look back from 2022 to 2023 and actually see if those numbers are accurate, and kind of verify that. If they are accurate, then that's one thing we can take off the list and we can definitely verify. But I think there should be a way to capture the success, I'm going to call it success, of students that get pulled out in the 7th grade and the 8th grade, and represent what the true cohort is doing. And I don't think that the way this is written or being presented really represents that. So I'm also gonna ask the administration to kind of go back and disaggregate this data a little bit better so that we can see the representation, maybe even the sample size. But it makes sense, to Board Member Craig's point, if your numerator is different, then you're gonna get a different number. But I think that it's a success that's not really being represented, that students, the sixth grade number, I think, makes sense. But from seventh grade, we need to be able to see how some students changed that number because they were in an accelerated class. And then maybe they didn't move, some of those students from the seventh grade didn't move, but they moved in the eighth grade. So it makes sense, but I just don't know if I want to be able to verify the data from 2022 to present, and also figure out a way to capture the success of students moving to advanced placement, because that really does address the goal in addition to the number that's being retained. So I would like for the administration to kind of figure out a way to represent this particular goal, and really all the goals, but this particular one in a more representative sample that shows the success of students that are leaving for accelerated classes and the mixture of the cohort that exists for grades 7 and 8 particularly. And then my other part of the assignment is to verify that this data is accurate, because that doesn't make sense. It would be an anomaly and we would throw that out, but I want to verify that that's accurate. Thank you.
Other questions or comments, Mr. Lindy?
Yes, I think that this is a little bit different from what I was asking for. I think you're welcome to ask for anything that's helpful to you. I think what I was asking for is less, however you'd like to figure it out. I would just like to get a sense of what you think is explaining the gap and what we do about it. And that's not at the exclusion of what any other board members understand. I just wanted to clarify on my end.
Yes, and we can clarify all those questions, and looking at even some of less seventh graders take Algebra 1 than they do in the eighth grade. So we can look at all of that. And I would say to you, Board Member Lindy, that when we see any decrease, we do create a plan. We look at that data, look at where across the grade level we had a dip. Well, we look at sixth grade and say, okay, none of our kids are doing well with fractions. Let's go back, how do we create a plan? We do the collaborations where we bring the teachers down here, look at the curriculum, look at the data, create action plans on how we can do their work, how we'd assess them, what are they using in their iReady. So there are plans in place when we see that the kids aren't moving in the direction that we want them to move in. So we can actually bring that back to you as well. You're welcome.
Member Mapp?
Yes, thank you. So as you were speaking about the cohort, you said by 7th and 8th grade, there are students that are going into more accelerated classes. Is there disaggregated data that addresses, what schools are, we're seeing this happen in terms of, I know that previously there was a discussion, previous presentation about Walnut Hill students being removed from the data. So is there any information that is addressing what students of what schools are particularly moving into those accelerated courses?
We can get that for you.
We have those listed.
Okay.
We can make sure you get those.
Okay, because I'm wondering if that is also impacting how we're reading the data as well. Because I think it's essential to know what students are matriculated into those more accelerated classes and which students are not in terms of what school, because that would help to drive the plan as well to make sure that there's an improvement. The other question I have is around the iReady benchmark assessment versus the MAP benchmark assessment. So we recognize that we didn't meet the iReady benchmark, but we met the MAP testing. Can you explain the difference between the two assessments, and how does that help us meet our overall goal for the end of course exams? Like, what alignment is there for those assessments to be successful?
So iReady and MAP have the Lincoln report that gives us 85%, what word do I want to use, that shows that if this kid scores a certain score, 85% of it is accurate, that they will pass or be proficient on the assessment. So we use those assessments because they give the greatest comparison to when we take the state tests. So that's why we use them. iReady runs a little different, and not in terms of data, but when the kids take the iReady assessment, it's connected to them, and they get an individual plan based on how well they do. The teachers also have a space in there where they can go in and assign lessons to the students based on what that data is, which is all about the standards. So based on what the kids do on those standards, that's where that falls out. MAP does a little different. They have a learning continuum, but we also use what we call Zern, that is a state-approved online platform for our kids in mathematics that they can use. And we have Savvis for our 7 through 12 kids. So MAP is just a little different. We have to read it a little different, make adjustments to it in instruction, whereas an iReady kind of lays that work all the way out for the teachers to do that work. So that's where you see that correlation at. That's why we use that projected proficiency, because it comes pretty close to whether a kid will be proficient or not. And when Amanda did a triangular study of it, the kids that used that iReady the way it was supposed to, the schools that did it, and we saw tremendous growth in those schools that did it the way it was prescribed.
Okay, so these essentially are two helpful assessments that can help with our benchmarking and determining proficiency.
And they guide the work because they assess the kids on what we need them to know for each grade level. So once we get that assessment back, we can then determine what the intervention or enrichment looks like in a building and what a student needs in order to move forward. And so that iReady for our K-6 kids, they need 40 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes on it a week, and then they are to pass 2 assessments at 70% or higher. When that is done in conjunction with Tier 1 instruction, you see students moving very rapidly.
Okay. My next question, I think I have maybe just 2 more questions. So next question is around the Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 instruction. How are we balancing that? I recognize that we talked about that there needs to be more intentionality around Tier 1 and making sure that there's uniformity there. But when we're getting into those Tier 2, Tier 3 interventions, how do we balance that to ensure that those students are getting that kind of that individualized or small group support, but they're not missing the bulk of Tier 1, so that we can make sure that we're not just focusing on remediation, but I always advocate for acceleration. How are we doing those 2 things in balance?
So I would say for our K-6 buildings, I'll start there first. And for all grade levels, we've created what we call the instructional framework. And in that framework, it maps out how much time you should spend on a Tier 1, how much time in Tier 2. Usually Tier 3 kids are pulled out because that's a whole nother level of almost individual work because they're not getting it at any other space. So it's mapped out for them. They have it there, days that they should do small group instruction, what that looks like, the space activities that we're talking about. It's all mapped out and it's given to all the teachers. So you don't have to worry about time. It's all there. So I'm going to spend my 10 minutes, my 5 to 7 minutes on my problem of the day. I'm going to then go into my whole lesson. Then I'm going to break out into my small groups, or either I'm going to be working, they're going to be working in pairs. Magnetic is what we use for our Tier 2 in the elementary schools. 7 to 12, it gets a little different, right? Because they have 50-minute blocks. So having to figure out how do I do those interventions during that 55-minute time. Well, we created a schedule for them as well, so they have 2 days that they can move in and out of what kids need based on what their data says they need. So it's mapped out for them. So if they follow it and use it and make it work for them, there's plenty of time for them to do everything they need to do for the young people.
All right, and then my last question is really speaking to pretty much all of the data that was shared today. So again, looking from a lens of systemically moving data forward, so I recognize with tech, we may assign teachers based off of the amount of students in each building. How do we look at teachers in terms of their strengths, not just teachers, but principals, administration? How are we utilizing their strengths to make sure that they are positioned in a space that will really help to drive that data forward? And I'll give an example. I remember when I was teaching fifth grade and sixth grade, and I wanted to stay at sixth grade because I enjoyed teaching sixth grade. But my principal said, well, I'm going to move you down to fourth and fifth so that you can help drive that data, because we know that you'll be able to do great work with those students on the state test. Are we placing our principals, are we placing our teachers in positions to help them be successful based off of their strengths, and having those continual conversations about the work so that we can move that work forward?
We are having those conversations. Myself and the assistant soups continually, we do site visits weekly to the schools. We walk through with the principals. We have conversations about the work, what their data looks like, what support they need from us. How do we help them move the work? Is there a space where a teacher is struggling or a teacher is doing very well? How can we get other teachers in to see what that teacher is doing? So that leadership piece, we work hands-on with them. With the teacher piece, as you know, we follow the CBA, and if we have TAC and we have to move a teacher or put a teacher in a position that's within her license that maybe she hasn't taught, we then wrap around services around that teacher to make sure she has what she needs. So that may be bringing the instructional coach out, that may be bringing the district-wide mentor out, that may be the principal allowing that teacher time to go see other teachers doing it, making sure they have additional planning time to look into and dig into that curriculum. So we try to make sure that they have the support that they need so that they can be successful in that grade. It doesn't feel good. Nobody likes TAC. We're talking about that in negotiations right now. So, but that's the space that we live in. So I think that we look at where people are, we look at their data, what their strengths are, and then we provide them the support so they can do what they need to do for the kids that they're servicing. But the leadership is hands-on. We're walking and talking with them. We're doing walkthroughs. We're talking about what we see in their data, especially when this data comes out. We're sitting down and having data conversations. Talk to me about what's happening in third grade. They really blew it out the water. What is that? What happened in fifth grade? They dropped some. How do we support? And there are different barriers that happen to data. So we want to not make assumptions, but sit down and dig into that data and talk about where we are and where do we go next, creating a plan with that principal on how we're going to move that work.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Dr. Smith, would you introduce the final presentation now?
Thank you.
Yes, my book is all messed up now. We have Emily Campbell and her team coming to do the Tier 2 Reading Intervention Adoption recommendation to the board.
Good evening. We are excited to join you to share our recommendations for a Tier 2 reading intervention curriculum, which is just it's really great to follow the goals and guardrails around our Goal 1, our Goal 2, which are directly related to literacy. This is a solvable problem. Research shares that 95% of our students can learn to read if we follow an approach that is aligned to the science of reading. And this team that I have brought, we have Pam Coughlin, Interim ELA Manager. We have Emily Stepanek, our ELA Curriculum Council Chair. We have April Thompson, our K3 Council Chair. And we have Adam Besler, our Instructional Materials Manager. Have done phenomenal work this year, piloting, analyzing, piloting some more intervention materials that are aligned to the science of reading. So just as a general reminder about what it takes to learn to read. Language, oral language, is something that children just learn naturally. Our brains are wired to learn it naturally. Learning to read is something different, where we have to actually remap the brain, and so repetitions matter. And we need to increase repetitions for students who are struggling. So that is what this team is here to recommend.
Thank you. We recruited and created our adoption committee in collaboration with all of our curriculum councils. And as you can see from the list on these couple of slides, our participants, we had representation from all grade levels, as well as classroom teachers, reading specialists, ESL specialists, intervention specialists, and paraprofessionals on our committee. This was important to us to make sure we were representing all of the stakeholders that are in our classroom supporting our students. If you can go to the next, thank you, and the next one. This work began because in 2023, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine launched his Read Ohio initiative, which is a statewide effort to raise literacy achievement. Under Ohio Revised Code, the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce was responsible for establishing a list of evidence-based reading intervention programs that are aligned to the science of reading and strategies for effective literacy instruction. Beginning no later than this academic year, each school district must use evidence-based reading interventions programs only from the list that the state has established. It also further states that we are required to select, purchase, and begin training teachers on these intervention programs. And so that is really why we launched this adoption process in the fall. Next slide, please. Because the state had already vetted these programs, they had had a process to vet the programs that were aligned with the science of reading and were evidence-based. Our team was tasked with creating a list of must-haves to help determine which of these programs would be the best fit for the students of Cincinnati Public. The must-haves that we agreed on were a program that included systematic, explicit instruction, provided access for all students across the district and within buildings, provided a clear scope and sequence that builds from easiest to most difficult skills, programs that were financially sustainable year after year, programs that had an ease of implementation with training, and that required little preparation with minimal materials. On this slide, you can see the criteria listed on the left, as well as which programs the KID committee chose to pilot that met those criteria on the right. One of the most important parts of this work was engaging the various stakeholders to ensure the products we adopt for our students, families, and staff. We requested this feedback in multiple ways, which are kind of summarized here. Some of these ways were exploring the different intervention programs through curriculum fairs, piloting preferred materials in classrooms, reviewing feedback and recommendations from teachers during the adoption committee meetings, sharing this feedback and providing space for our curriculum councils to ask questions and provide their own comments. We hosted a community event. We presented our findings at several LSDMCs, and we've been displaying our materials both at the Ed Center and on our CPS website for the last month.
Next slide, please. The next few slides outline the recommendations at each grade band. At K2, the pilot committee overwhelmingly recommends Youth Life Foundations. They found this program to be highly engaging with consistent routines that led to student success. Next slide, please.
For grades 3+, we have recommended that we continue to use phonics for reading and magnetic reading. Teachers in our district are familiar with these programs, but have requested additional training to support increased implementation with integrity. Next slide, please.
For grades 7 and up, the committee recommends Success Maker for classroom teachers. This program offers a personalized digital component as well as small group lessons for explicit instruction. It provides intervention in both foundational skills as well as reading comprehension. Classroom teachers will need additional training and implementation support with this program. In addition, our reading specialists and intervention specialists have requested rewards for their small group instruction to provide additional support in multisyllabic word reading. Next slide, please. The recommendations of this committee allow for comprehensive literacy interventions from grades K to 12. The programs selected meet all of the must-haves criteria established by the committee members. It ensures that all students will have access to high-quality instructional materials that align to the science of reading in accordance with Ohio Revised Code. It provides for multiple intervention programs to better align to student needs across the district and within our buildings. And they will be implemented and supported through various teacher training opportunities, curriculum alignment tools, and ongoing support from the ELA department. We are excited to recommend for board adoption UFly Foundations, Magnetic and Phonics for Reading, Success Maker, and Rewards, and are happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Mr. Craig?
Well, first off, let me say thank you for bringing this to us. I know you brought it earlier, just the thought of how we were going to address the issue of the legislation that was passed, and so it's now good to see the results of that coming to the forefront, and I appreciate the logic and reasoning behind all of it. So I'm a very systematic person, so if you bring me something that makes sense and flows pretty easily, I'm pretty easy to please in that sense. I think one thing that may be helpful for me to kind of also document why we do this work and what the benefits we expect to see might be is just to give it a little bit of an idea of what we adopt this, we go through, and what should we then see as a result, right? What does our end result look like as a result of all this?
So I don't want to just stop at the simple answer, but we're going to see more kids reading. But at that primary level, less and less students are going to be moving from grade level to grade level, needing that intervention. And so at the primary, you're going to see that students with access to a strong tier 1 and then getting the 40 to sometimes 240 repetitions that they need to remap their brains, they will learn to read. Like, this is the problem that we know can be solved. At that intermediate level, it gets harder and harder to catch students up the further they matriculate in K-12. And so that's why there are the two resources at that intermediate level to both teach students how to read and to fill in the gaps with comprehension and vocabulary, which was named earlier as a need.
And I know a large part of that focus with regards to that K through 3 and teaching kids early how to read has been about getting them out of, teaching them how to read as opposed to teaching them what they're reading, right? So like to move them away from just simply looking at a picture or an image, but getting them into that, training their mind to think.
Yes.
And that prepares them to think later when words are new, when things are new to them. I wanted to say the other quick thought I had in my head with all of this, because I was not one of those kids who loved reading. I kind of did it because I had to. And then I went to law school, and you have to do it even more.
Yeah.
But you get used to seeing words, you get used to understanding words, you get used to experiencing words, you get more familiar, for those students who have, for instance, learning disabilities and other things, the more comfortable they are with something they're doing, the less that potential disability might affect their ability to do it. And I think that's the other parts of this that I expect we would see some great results in is some of our students who are requiring more needs, as we've talked about with regard to our budget and trying to figure out how we're going to address our students who come in who may have more challenges in front of them or may walk in with less prior experience or less communication outside the school. The more they're familiar with it, the more they're comfortable with it, the more we're exposing them to it, the less those challenges will impede their ability to keep going. So I appreciate the hard work you all did.
Other questions, comments? Member Mapp?
So it's just a comment initially. I will say that I had an opportunity to witness the implementation of UFly at Rockdale Academy with Principal Watson, and I can't remember the second grade teacher's name, but it was such a rewarding experience to see the students truly engaged in that, and they actually led the work. It wasn't the teacher. They were excited to really showcase what they have been learning, and so they were leaders in the work, and so I just want you to know that I had an opportunity to experience that firsthand, and it seems to be a very great use of curriculum. And I enjoyed seeing the blending board and how they were able to, determine words and also go through just that whole phonemic process of blending words together. So I was grateful to experience that. I have not experienced the other ones, but I do look forward to possibly having an opportunity to maybe we can see that work in action. I do have a question, though, as it pertains to the curriculum. Is there an opportunity for each level or each curriculum that's being discussed, is there an opportunity for students to not only understand how to do the work, but understand like the why and how to strategically apply what they're learning based off the curriculum that's being recommended?
Do you want to talk about how that?
Yeah, I do think that that is kind of part of those programs, is just the understanding of how to apply it. So just for example, with UFly, when the students begin learning new sounds, then they learn to blend those sounds, and then they are giving a passage to read that immediately includes those new sounds. So they're already, like the day that they're learning it, they're starting to apply those skills. And most of these programs are cyclical. So they're going to go back and they're going to review something they've learned before they move on to the next thing. So they'll see how it's applying as they're going through.
Okay, perfect. And does it offer opportunity for it to be cyclical in nature with writing as well as speaking?
Yeah, actually, many of them do include some aspects of writing as well, because especially, again, I'm going to talk about UFly just because that is that K2 where we are learning to read. There is also a learning to spell. That's an aspect of that as well. So in that intervention, they won't just be learning to read the sounds, they'll be learning to spell words using those sounds.
Thank you.
Mr. Lindsay?
Can I just add one comment about handwriting too, is that is also a piece of learning to read. The physical formation of the letters, and so those are our skills within there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Lindsay?
Thank you very much. I think this is all great, and there's no but after this, so thank you. I'm excited about this. I think it's great work. A couple of very short questions. My understanding of CPS is we have been, at least in my time here, pretty good on adopting high-quality curriculum. And so I think I got this from the slides, but most of this is, we've actually already done some of the things the state's now requiring all states to do. How much of this was new that we had to do?
That's a great question. Kudos to our team, because much of what we have been doing is aligned to the science of reading. The biggest difference between what we are trying to do by purchasing an intervention program that is consistent across the district is to have an intervention program that is consistent across the district. So we have like Spire in some places, Sound Partners in some places. Some of those were not on the approved list for various reasons. They didn't meet the high quality standard, or the vendor didn't apply, or whatnot. And then some of the things that we have are outdated and don't meet all the requirements for high quality interventions. And so what we're trying to do is level the playing field and make sure that all kids who are not yet reading have access to high quality.
That's great. And I think this ties back to the other question we were talking about, Dr. Smith, about the way you all track implementation. My sense of us at CPS is that the bigger issue we're going to need to figure out is how to make sure everyone is using and using well the curriculum that we have adopted. And that's only possible because of the hard work you all do. But the big, next frontier, I think, is how to make sure that it's getting used correctly.
Yes.
Is that accurate? Okay.
Yes.
And then the other piece, this was just quick.
Yes.
I don't know that this would change anything, or it might. I'm certainly not suggesting that we try to cut corners on any of this, but we do ultimately have to pay for whatever curriculum we adopt. One thing I didn't see in the review was looking at the cost of these various programs. Like, is that something that you all take into consideration? Can you talk about the cost piece just a little bit?
Yes. Yes, we took it into consideration, especially this year, because we are not going into this blind. We understand that there are budget concerns. The committee made that a must-have, like what is the most financially sustainable program that still meets the needs of the requirements that kids need to have to learn to read. So this year, we are requesting that upon a board vote, that this is our approved intervention program, that we purchase approximately $190,000 this year that incorporates UFly, because some schools have it, but very few. Magnetic and Phonics for Reading, we purchased at the beginning of the year, and so I think that's only about $6,000 of the $190,000, just to make sure that we're filling an inventory need. And then Success Maker we've already had, and Rewards we already had. Did I forget something?
And Ms. Campbell, I apologize. You all did have this in a slide, and I just missed it. So I should have just said thank you. I appreciate the attention to the finances.
Okay, and PD, yes, it also includes PD.
Yeah, that is one aspect I think for implementation is just making sure that we can increase the PD for teachers so that they feel more comfortable with the programs to help to increase that implementation.
I actually was going to ask about the financial implementation and how much it would cost. I did not see it in the slide, so thank you so much for asking that. But I just wanted to quickly say thank you so much to everyone here who brought all of this information to us. I get so excited when it comes to curriculum adoption, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
President Moffitt?
So I shared, I just got back from the governor's address, and he talked about the science of reading again and making it a mandate. Before, I think it was a nice, gentle recommendation, and now it's kind of a mandate that districts use this. And I felt very proud because I was sitting with Superintendent Murphy, and we already do that. In true CPS fashion, we are innovative and creative, and we are already on it. So thank you to the team for all the work that you all are doing to justify it. I was thinking around, and with mandates that come from the state, they don't always come with money. So I was thinking around financially, what can we do to ensure that if we make a significant investment, mandated or not, that the staff are using it? Because I believe reading is fundamental. If we improve our reading, if everyone can read, their math is going to be better, their science is going to be better, all of that. But I just don't want to throw good money after bad, in that we need to ensure with a stronger nudge than a nudge that we're investing in this and it gets to be something that's done. So can you all, have you thought of, let me not put you on the spot, have you thought of ways to enforce usage of this wonderful curriculum?
Enforce.
So maybe I'll go first and you add on, is that, or do you want to
Let's
just go?
let's do that, Emily.
Okay, all right, so I believe in my heart and hearts that people don't show up to a job with intentionality to do it wrong. So I think it's about support, support, support. Our team is more than just managers, we have instructional coaches as well, but contextualizing what implementation looks like, helping people see what good implementation looks like. People cannot do what they can't envision, and so those are huge just strategies to help with that. And also providing bite-size, try this next, and then this next with follow-up and support and how can I help you are critical. And then I'll just send it over to our deputy to keep speaking to that.
So we've been talking about all of this, even with what Board Member Lindy said, like making sure people use it. So as I talk to Superintendent Murphy and we meet, we're talking about how we're systemically going to support people, put systems and structures in place on what does that look like. So here we are in the month of September. What does that look like at a school? And as we go in to do our walkthroughs and our instructional rounds, we are looking for that work to be happening and then having conversations. I also, we're going to sit down with Julie and Kendra and talk to the union and say, okay, this is where we are. How do we all work together collaboratively to make sure that everybody's on the same page so that we're doing the things that we need to do to ensure that the kids get what they need? And I think that comes from that collaborative conversation about these are the schools that have to have, this is what the intervention looks like. And then when we look at our data, we know that there's some places where it'll be intervention heavy and some places where it'll be enrichment heavy. So we don't want to forget about any of the kids, those who need to close the gap, but those who need extension of their learning. But it's going to come from us coming together and creating a system-wide approach that has structures in place that provide support, but also accountability.
And my last question is around data. So that was a perfect segue. Look, we just, great minds think alike. Is there a way for us to use the data that we currently have without full implementation as a foundation, a baseline, and then demonstrate how if the curriculum, once it's implemented, we're seeing this level of success, or we're seeing this change? That's kind of what, not to justify it because the governor is mandating it, but to show and demonstrate improvement, not only in reading, but then look at that in math, look at that in science from that particular cohort. Because at some level, if we adopt this, everyone's going to be getting some semblance of the science of reading, right? Some enrichment or implementation. So we should be able to see over time the data improve on all levels. So just wanted to know if you all had thought about that from a longitudinal way.
Yeah, yes, and that's how we look at all the work. That's why when we look at the winter data, we're like, wait, what did they do? Or what did they do? Oh my, that group of kids really grew. And so then we go and we're having those conversations when the principals have their data meeting to talk about what strategies, what's going on in that school. I think it'll be great for us when we take this fall data to look at where those kids are, then begin to implement these programs across the district. And we'll be progress monitoring. So we'll have sets of data that we'll be able to see where kids are growing or not growing, to see what support's needed, what barriers might be in place that we need to help move out of the way so that we can get those things. So yes, and we'll be able to tell you guys how that worked, what that looked like, what we did differently. And you should see growth because, as Emily said, kids, when they learn to read, confidence go up. They want to be at school. So you'll see changes in so many different places once we put this program into place.
I'm thinking about it even from like a financial return on investment conversation. You know, we invest this much money and we're seeing this much improvement. Therefore,
Yes.
it was a return. Thank you.
Any last questions or comments? Member Mapp?
So yes, my question and comment was very similar to yours, Dr. Moffitt, in regards to financially, we've already made investments with several of our teachers doing the professional development or training around the science of reading. And so just curious to know, have we already begun to track the, I guess, that data with those teachers that may have already gone through just having that additional support, and how the students are progressing for those teachers that have gone through training?
We haven't started to track that yet.
Okay.
Yeah, because we have, I don't know how many teachers we have that have completed it.
We have about
But-
40% at this
Yeah,
point.
so,
Okay. Thank you.
Any other last comments or questions? Thank you all very much. Great presentation. It's good to see some faces associated with the names. Appreciate you bringing
to
the whole
vote, right?
team. I believe at this time we have completed, and the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn unless, Dr. Smith, you have something to add?
I think, do we have to vote on the recommendation? Or,
Well, I'm not sure. We don't have a vote scheduled, and it's, this is a
oh, this
committee
is
of
the
the whole.
cow, right?
We don't, but I was thinking the presentation was today. We'll vote on it on,
Okay, perfect.
on Monday.
And my understanding is it would appear in the superintendent or
Superintendent.
treasurer.
Yes, thank you. No,
I just didn't want to do the presentation and everything today.
Yes.
So you guys are
No,
good. Monday.
this is the best place to do it because we
Yep.
have a great chance to ask questions.
Yes.
Yep, good selection.
I have-
Entertaining motion,
So moved.
a second?
Second.